So Browns training camp is literally days away from starting. It starts on the 25th. The veterans are now reporting. Rookies have already reported over the weekend. Football season is literally this close to being back. And since we are so close to the beginning of training camp, I want to talk about players who this training camp is going to be especially important to. Players who have a assumed role on this roster, but that role can fluctuate greatly based on how they perform in camp, right? There are guys who are going to be pretty safe on this roster, like Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. Right? Camp doesn't really dictate anything for them. It's just literally there to get them prepared for the season. But for other guys, and the guys that we're going to talk about in this video, camp's going to be extremely crucial for these names. So I want to talk about them. I want to talk about why these names are on the list versus other names that you might think will be on the list. And we're going to start first with the quarterback position. If there is one guy in that room where I'm like, training camp performance is going to be critical to their role in the upcoming season, it is without a doubt Kenny Pickett. I know people are more invested in what's going to happen with Shedeur Sanders or what's going to happen with Dillon Gabriel, but at the end of the day, their role is more than likely not going to change that greatly. Either Dillon Gabriel keeps his spot as the third in order, or Shedeur Sanders usurps him and becomes the backup quarterback by the end of this. But it would take an extraordinary effort for either of those guys to start. And it's possible that both of those guys could ball out and none of them could end up being the starter by week one, just because the Browns will prefer some experience to start the season out because they're going up against such a tough slate of teams in the first 6 weeks. No, those guys are relatively safe. I don't think Sanders is going anywhere. I don't think Dillon Gabriel is going anywhere. They're going to be here. What they do in camp, it can slide them up a little bit, but it's not going to really change everything for them. Joe Flacco, it's just not going to be important how he performs in camp because I don't think he's going to be asked to perform that much in camp, right? He's 40 plus years old. You know what you got in Joe Flacco in this offense. You're evaluating based off that idea. Kenny Pickett is the one where if he has a great camp, he could be the definite starter for this team for the rest of the year. If he has a terrible camp, he can find himself off the team by the end of camp and possibly even on the Cleveland Browns practice squad. He has the most to gain and the most to lose based on his training camp performance more than anyone. And I expect to see this reflected in his snap count, in his time with the ones during training camp, right? Like, I think he's going to by far probably have twice as many first team reps as any other quarterback on this team, not because he's the de facto starter, just because his evaluation during training camp is going to be the most critical. I know people will take this as, oh, he's taking 35 snaps versus everybody else. That means he must be the starter. I don't think that's necessarily how that's going to work out. I think they're going to want to see the most out of Kenny Pickett because Kenny Pickett is the one where the evaluation matters the most during training camp. Yes, there will be Shedeur. Yes, there will be Dillon Gabriel. But if we're talking about who's going to start week one, those two will likely be more of a sideshow than real threats to become the starter week one, more than anything, right? And that's kind of how it operated during OTAs. While everybody was arguing about first team reps and who looks better between Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, what people weren't talking about was that Kenny Pickett was getting a lot of the reps, most of the first team reps in the OTAs, a large share of those reps. So I expect a similar dynamic to play out unless one of these rookies come out and completely flip the script with just out of this world training camp performance. So yeah, to me, if you're looking at the quarterback room and you're asking me who's going to be the quarterback that has the most to gain, most to lose in training camp, 1,000% Kenny Pickett. I would argue of all the players on the offense, maybe even the whole team combined, that's the guy who has the most to gain or most to lose. There are some players on defense and special teams that I do think have a lot to lose in camp this year, but Kenny Pickett stands out the most on offense. Another player who I think is going to be really important to see what they do in training camp now more than ever, because we have uncertainty with Quincy Junkins, is Dylan Sampson. My concern about the running back room was that we were relying a little bit too much on Dylan Sampson even before the Quincy Junkins story came out. Now that story seems like something that will lead to an eventual suspension for Quincy Junkins, we're going to lean on Dylan Sampson even more. Now, the Browns might bring in somebody within the next couple of days. Maybe they did it over the weekend before this video came out. But Dylan Sampson's going to be leaned on quite a bit here during the regular season. And I think it's going to be important for us to see positive signs that this is somebody who's ready year one. There's some reason to be concerned about that, right? He's not the typical size profile of a guy who comes out of college ready to go in the NFL immediately, right? He's 5'8", 200 pounds. Usually your NFL pro-ready guys are sitting around 220, right? Weight-wise, I think that's really what's important. That's what you're missing with Junkins being out. But he was the SEC rushing yard leader, but also he comes from Tennessee, and Tennessee's offense has been notoriously hard to predict who's going to transition well to the NFL type of offense in college football. So that's really where we're sitting with Dylan. The run load is going to be heavier on him. We're going to be hoping for more out of Dylan Sampson. And the question is he going to show us in training camp that we got nothing to be concerned about because he's going to be able to hold his own if asked to hold his own? Now, to be fair to Dylan, was a bell cow running back at Tennessee, despite the fact that he's not prototypical bell cow size, had a ton of carries in college football. But college football, very different from the NFL. It's a world of difference. Even if you're playing in the SEC against some of the best competition, running the football in college and running the football in the NFL are just two different worlds of different. So we'll see what happens there. But Dylan Sampson, given everything else that's going on, he's going to be super important to this Cleveland Browns team. Let's flip to the defensive side real quick, because there's two Browns I want to highlight that I think are in that kind of limbo position. Martin Emerson, he's at a place to where if he puts together a good camp, he puts together a good regular season, he could get paid and have a nice rest of his career. On the other hand, if Martin Emerson does not put together a nice camp, does not put together a nice season, he can find himself in NFL limbo much faster than I think anybody imagined Martin Emerson would find himself if we're talking about how good he looked a couple of years ago. He's in this tipping point of his career. I think he will find his way out of it positively. He was really good his first 2 years in the NFL. I don't know specifically what happened with him last year. Corners tend to have down years for whatever reason. I don't know what was going on with Martin, but he had a down year for sure last season. That's going to be the tipping point for him, right? How much does the front office trust him? How much do the Cleveland Browns trust him? I think a lot of that trust is going to be built in camp. And if he's able to look like the Martin Emerson of old, he will get the role that Martin Emerson has always had. And if Martin Emerson performs in that role during the regular season, he will get money for that role, right? Good money for that role. If he's not able to be successful at that role, he's probably going to get traded in the middle of the year for a draft asset, similar to what happened with Donovan Peoples-Jones. So there are two clear routes that we can see with Martin Emerson, right? There's the David Njoku route, make or break year. He turns up, earns the second contract. And then there is the Donovan Peoples-Jones route here that could happen with him. He's in that same fork in the road. A guy who is in a similar fork in the road, but with much lower money involved or much less money involved is Alex Wright. Alex Wright, because the Browns defensive line is so deep, he's kind of in danger for his roster spot. He has to compete with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka at a role that he's not really suited at, right? Which means he's probably going to be asked more to kick inside a 3-tech, which he's not perfectly suited for. I just don't know if the Browns are really checking for somebody to do what he does, given that Isaiah McGuire stepped in during the season and did what you want Alex Wright to do at a high level, right? What we've always wanted Alex Wright to be was a long and strong opposite edge defender from Myles Garrett who can be really strong in the run game. And while Alex has shown promise at that role, he's not ever really lived up to it in the run defense part of it. Isaiah McGuire already has. He was the third best run defense edge, graded edge by Pro Football Focus last year, and had some of the best kind of advanced numbers against the runs of any edge in the NFL. So, yeah, you got somebody in Isaiah McGuire who kind of does what you need to do at a higher level, and you're not going to beat him out for his spot. So you got to find a new niche on this team, and I think that's really what the concern is for Alex Wright. Does he find another role for him to carve himself out on this defensive unit that can make him not expendable at this point? Because right now, if they were to make cuts, the argument would be made that Alex Wright is expendable as far as the front office is concerned. And that's not really somewhere you want to see Alex Wright fall down. Then the last guy I think camp is really important to, and it's ironic given that Dustin Hopkins got here because of somebody else's bad camp. But it wouldn't shock me if Dustin Hopkins' replacement got here because of a bad camp by Dustin Hopkins. Dustin Hopkins is in the same position that Cade York was in a couple of off seasons ago, right? Everybody is wondering why in the world are we just kind of casually rolling back into camp with Dustin Hopkins as the kicker, right? They brought in somebody to compete with them, but it's not known competition, right? It's somebody from the UFL. I don't mind that it's somebody from the UFL, but the average person is going to look at that kicking competition and not think it's a real competition there for Dustin Hopkins, which is making a lot of people concerned. The Browns are planning on running the ball a lot. They're planning on playing this kind of grinded out defensive-oriented style of football, and I have never seen an example, a successful example of that kind of team that is able to win games like that without above average field goal kicking. Right? Like that is a necessary piece to the recipe of trying to win games that way. And right now, the Browns are lacking that piece, right? Because there's no faith that Dustin Hopkins is going to give you above average kicking based on what he did last year. Think this is going to go similar to what it did with Cade York. If Dustin Hopkins get out there and he seems to still be struggling kicking the football, I do think the Browns will make a last-minute trade at cutdowns and get rid of him that way, use an extra 7 for whatever they have in their arsenal to move off of him and bring in somebody that they covet at the kicker position. If Dustin Hopkins is fine during the preseason, I think they'll trust him and give him another shot. So that's why I think his training camp is going to matter a great deal, because I think that's going to be what makes the decision for the Cleveland Browns if they move on from Dustin Hopkins or not. I think he is truly kicking for his job during this training camp period. But those are the players I think that are coming into training camp right now with the highest stakes, in my opinion. Let me know your opinion in the comment section down below. Who do you think is coming into training camp with the highest stakes? Let me know your thoughts. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.